Hello everyone, Remix Review Guy here. I review remixes. Well, it's finally here, my best remixes of 2024 list. Slightly later than planned as I got the lurgy during the festive period, but then if you think about it, shouldn't these lists always be in January anyways? We never know if someone's going to release the best track of the year on December 31st. Spoiler alert, they did not. So yeah, as my first ever best of the year list, this was a bit of an odd one to make, as unlike lists of hit songs where there's an actual database that keeps track of everything that was a hit that year, there isn't one for all the remixes that get released in a year, as far as I know. If there is, for the love of God, tell me, please. As such, I spent significant portions of the year researching every nook and cranny of the internet for remix news. I did regular searches on Google News, Pitchfork, Boomcat, Bleep, Beatport, Bandcamp. I'd also especially like to give a shout out to Brooklyn Vegan, who were very good for keeping up with remix releases throughout the year. Terrible for recipes, but great for music. And so with all this research under my belt, I feel I can answer with some authority the question, how was 2024 for remixes? And my answer would be, to be honest, the only true reference point I have for comparison so far is 2023, which was the year that really made me want to start doing this channel. And that's mainly because it felt like there was an abundance of good remix albums that year. Panda Bear and Sonic Boom, Paramore, Water From Your Eyes, On Man. By contrast, it felt like the number of full-length overhauls of albums that were worth noting in 2024 was relatively few, which is why I'm not going to do a best remix albums list on this occasion. And yet, considering this year had The Guardian questioning whether remixing was dead midway through, 2024 was also the year in which Charli XCX dropped what might end up being the most talked about and most celebrated remix album of the decade. Mariah Carey made a 16-minute remix of one of her songs to celebrate her extensive history of club reworks, and even the world's largest children's band got on the remix train. So even without an abundance of solid remix albums this year, there was still plenty of officially released remixes that showcased the sheer creative breadth of the art form. A whole host of remixes that took the original source material into surprising, unusual places, or just galvanised it in a way that really honed in on some quality decision making, rather than just making songs more club friendly or adding a guest verse. So let's get into it. For possibly the first and only time on YouTube, here comes the top 10 remixes of 2024. Number 10. The Orb remixing Deep Into Nature by Captain Hook. Yep, over 3 decades since he annoyed Bob Geldof by playing chess on Top of the Pops, Alex Patterson is still weaving his oddball electronic magic for a new generation. In fact, he's very much become part of the furniture as far as underground techno and ambient goes, and not everything he turns out would necessarily warrant my attention, but this remix was very much a welcome surprise. Particularly given that Captain Hook's original minimalist psytrance material gave its remixers very little to work with, honestly. And so Patterson turned to a genre that celebrates spaciousness perhaps better than many other genres can: reggae. Now, this wasn't the only remix from Captain Hook's Ouroboros remix packages that went down the reggae route, and there were others that were perhaps more technically impressive or more aggressively innovative than this one, but none that captured a vibe quite so well. And impressively, he managed to create a piece that both acknowledges elements of the original track and fashions something far more muscular, trippy and engaging than could frankly be expected from such a task. It feels a little bit like Thievery Corporation's more dub-addled stuff, but it's not just laying on reverb in the hope that trippiness will occur. Patterson's trademark combination of humour and lushness ensures that there are numerous elements of interest throughout, flitting from some cartoony vocal samples to some wonderful orchestral string swells that results in a gorgeous cinematic climax to the track. Most importantly for me though, it does that thing that dub reggae has really nailed over the years, which is making space travel seem like an appealing magical venture. The same can't be said for this instantly dated AI video they made for the remix, but hey ho. I am still patiently waiting for the big reggae revival in music, and I don't necessarily think this is it. Patterson wouldn't be anywhere near the top of my list for ambassadors for reggae anyway. I've heard his remix of Robbie Williams. But if the road to reggae's big comeback involves more dub remix of trance tracks, then honestly, I'm probably not going to be complaining. Come on, Adrian Sherwood. It's about time you did something with Ferry Corsten, isn't it? Number 9. Slow spin on the remix of Dreamer by Nabihah Iqbal. There is a strange phenomenon in remixing that I like to call the commissioned cover version, whereby the remixer decides not only to ditch all of the original musical stems from the song, but also re-records all the vocals as well. And here, with this remix of Nabihah Iqbal, we have a new addition to the fold. In terms of whether such compositions technically count as a remix or not, honestly, I don't care anywhere near as much as I probably should. If it's presented with the phrase remix, or is at least included within the context of a remix album, I'm not going to spend too much time arguing against it. The original song is a solid piece of dream pop. Decent enough, but didn't really stand out to my ears. Dream pop is a genre which is routinely associated with obfuscating vocals using reverb, and much like shoegaze, a cynic could make the assertion that such artists are just trying to mask poor lyricism. And with this song Dreamer, certainly written down these lyrics don't seem like anything particularly poetic, even though there are other Iqbal songs that I'd argue have some pretty decent lyricism in them. But for me, this is the genius of this slow spin remix. It scales everything right down so that it's 20 times more intimate, and yet it's still just as dreamy. Sky, so blue. And it feels like every syllable of the lyrics counts. Some of the great psychedelic folk singers of the last millennium, like Vashti Bunyan and Linda Perhacs, had the same quality. It doesn't really matter what they were singing, like Perhacs literally had a song where she was just listing different shapes. But the sound of their voices and the sonic world they inhabit is just so immersive it draws you in. And here Slow Spin's vocals are right up there for me. It doesn't feel like she's replacing Iqbal's vocals per se, more that she's just scaling them down, achieving what Iqbal does in a more intimate setting without copious reverb. And given that I didn't even realise that the vocals were re-sung until I read the liner notes, it feels like that feel has been achieved really well. Also got to give a special mention to the keys on this track, which are by Zach Khan. It's got that kind of washed out VHS, sun peeking through the curtains quality to it, but without feeling like it's been overly processed to get that effect. Yeah, we're starting off this list pretty ambiently, but maybe that's just because in a year as chaotic as 2024, sometimes I just needed a little bit of calm. But we are definitely going to shift the gears up a notch for this next track. Number 8.
Toot toot chugga chugga big red car. We'll travel near and we'll travel far.
Yep, the Wiggles made the list. Unironically. In a year where EDM songs for adults increasingly sounded like they were made for kids by kids, one of the most interesting and unusual EDM tracks I heard was an EDM song made by a parent for parents that kids could also enjoy. The self-styled producer of toddler techno, Lenny Pierce, is a prime example of how, if you're going to have a gimmick, then you should take that gimmick 100% seriously, go all in on it, and do it as resoundingly straight-faced as possible. When the Wiggles' EDM remix album Rave of Innocence dropped in April this year, I initially suggested to friends of mine that I review the album as a joke, but the more I listened to it, I genuinely found it to be one of the more interesting albums of the year, even if its concept outstayed its welcome after 14 tracks. But if that project threw up any one track that was worth keeping hold of, then it is this pristine earworm. The brilliance of this remix is in how Pierce takes a jaunty song about car etiquette and applies minor chord dance music gorgeousness to it in a way that completely expands the original scene. As a stand-up comic, I've been in long car trips before with other people, not as the driver, but that notion of trying to maintain camaraderie, of the kind of things that you do in order to try and stay awake on a long journey home in the middle of the night. Those moments when you want to drift off, but you also want to stay awake with the driver so that you can help keep their spirits up, because you don't want them to feel too tired and lonely for the rest of the journey. This remix somehow took me right there. I sincerely doubt that Lenny Pierce intended to have this effect with this remix. He just wanted to party with his daughter. But genuinely, if a remix puts me mentally in a scene like that, there's something special about it. And specifically, it's the way that Greg Page's vocals are just whittled down to a solo track on here that give it this unexpected sense of isolation. I actually stumbled upon a fan remix of this track on YouTube where they added backing vocals into this remix.
Chug a big red car. We'll travel near and we'll travel far.
And to me it doesn't work, because that sense of loneliness in the original remix is what really makes it so potent. And most importantly, it does all of that whilst being catchy as hell. As silly and cheesy as this may be, I would kill for 90% of EDM tracks to have even a fraction of the character that this song does. And honestly, if you're still apprehensive about giving this song a try, it's less than 2 minutes long. Just do it.
Of the big red car.
Number 7. Dextro on the remix of Watusi by ephemeral krautrock veterans Harmonia. This one comes from their surprisingly low-key 50th anniversary remix package of their seminal debut Music von Harmonia, an album which ended up being the first 2024 release I actually reviewed on this channel. And an album where, despite its impressive lineup of remixers, it did feel like some of the more experienced and well-known names actually seemed a bit overawed by the source material, compared to less well-established names like Kalima and Post Neo, who took a much more devil-may-care attitude and yielded much greater rewards as a result. For me though, it was this remix from one-man post-rock band Dextro that was the real highlight of the album. And he came in with a pretty simple but actually quite daring idea. What if you gave Watusi some structure? Because sonically this isn't necessarily one of the more radical overhauls I put on this list. Dextro's main contributions are just adding drums, a bass line and a rising synth. But structurally, it gives the track something no self-respecting krautrock song would ever be seen dead with. A discernible start, middle and end. Part of the reason the original version is so iconic is because of its trippy jamming. It's very much about carefree wandering around one specific groove, constantly shifting but ultimately sticking to the same vibe for the entire song. Like a lot of the best krautrock, it feels like music to drive down the motorway to. This Dextro remix feels like a version for a time when we're reaching our destination. Something about this remix just sounds hopeful, reassuring. Maybe it's just because that synth line towards the end reminds me of 90s artifacts like Bittersweet Symphony. That kind of orchestral suggestion of triumph, optimism, of best things yet to come. Importantly though, it doesn't hit you immediately with that device. It sneaks up on you after a few minutes and gradually builds, as if to say, hope is not immediate. It's something that needs to be worked on. It's strange that in such chaotic times, one of the tracks this year that gave me such comfort was one that felt like it was adding order to proceedings, but genuinely with the world the way it is, where it seems like people are increasingly building cult of personalities around overgrown children, there's never been a time in my life where the notion of an actual grown-up turning up and fixing everything has sounded more appealing to me. Number 6. Grindcore band Full of Hell dropped their first ever remix this year in the form of Chelsea Wolfe's Eyes Like Nightshade, and it very much made me want to hear more remixes from them in future. This is from the Undone EP, another one that I reviewed earlier in the year, and one that really illustrated the breadth and creativity of industrial music. Wolfe's original album, She Reaches Out to She, was a harrowing listen informed by the journey to sobriety and her experience with sleep paralysis, and it showcased a lot of very impressive sound design, at least some of which came from virtuoso producer Dave Sitek. Occasionally though, the waves of production got a little too overwhelming, maybe a little oversaturated at points, and Eyes Like Nightshade was a good example of this. For me though, the Full of Hell remix managed a particularly impressive trick, taking an overladen original and making it sound a lot emptier, but somehow just as full. Apparently Full of Hell are one of the artists that Wolfe asked herself to do a remix for her rather than her record company, and on the basis of this, I'm very glad that she did. Rhythmically, it goes for this great syncopated dancehall beat, and ever since I discovered The Bug 2 decades ago, I've had such a penchant for industrial strength dancehall beats. But the main refrain of this remix is effectively this vacuum that sounds like an airlock being opened in Chelsea Wolfe's mind. Particularly special for me on this remix is the fluidity between lead vocals and backing vocals. Technically, Wolfe's on lead and Full of Hell are on backing vocals, but what makes this remix exciting to me is that both of them kind of seem ill-equipped for their respective jobs. As lead, Wolfe's soft-focused whispers seem very fragile and liable to be blown away at any point, whilst Full of Hell's screamo vocals just constantly erupt through the track like a tornado demon. Genuinely sounds like one of those id versus superego conversations, the sound of internal turmoil, even though they're saying the same lyrics as each other throughout the track. It has the feel of getting properly lost in the fog, like a kind of pea-soupy forest, possibly with someone brandishing an axe chasing after you. And that's before we even talk about the frankly evil-sounding choo-choo train noises towards the ends that have more than a hint of Tom Waits about them. Again, it's just one of those remixes that's just rife with visual imagery. Number 5. Ian Cook from the band Churches delivered a surprise remix of the Cardigans' 90s classic Linger. When I first started this channel, I knew there was going to be some instances where my opinion shifted on a song that I never thought it would shift on. But if you told me that the goddamn Cranberries would end up in my top 5 remixes of the year, I'd have had you down as a surrealist rather than a prophet. This is one of a few tracks in this video I haven't previously reviewed on this channel, partly because it wasn't part of any EP or albums, so just didn't really have a place in my schedule to put it. But it speaks to just how drama-brained I can be, the fact that the first thing that jumped out at me regarding this remix was just how controversial it seemed to be amongst some hardcore Cranberries fans on YouTube, with one of them even saying that the band should sue Ian Cook for it, even though Cranberries are the ones that requested it. They told him to his face that they really liked it, and they even contributed some ideas to it. What was most surprising to me about this one is that on the few occasions when someone tries to give actual critique of this remix, pretty much every note they had was something I could apply to the original. I've seen a couple of comments talking about how the remix drowns out Dolores O'Riordan's vocals, whereas there's a few parts of the original song that do the exact same thing. Another comment said that all the percussive elements in the remix were distracting. I don't know if you've listened to the original in headphones, but I did for the first time this year. And there's this percussive bit in the original that's quite low in the mix, but now that I've heard it, I just find it horrendously annoying. Was it just a game to you? Even saw one comment refer to this as generic twaddle. I'm not really sure what exactly they think this remix sounds like. Maybe the implication is that it's kind of a flavour of the month remix, but to me this sounds kind of 90s in many regards, just like the original. The main thing it reminded me of was the Now Voyager remix of You Got the Love by Candy Staton. Something that's cinematic, warm, emotive, and danceable all at the same time. And yet also there's something weirdly out of time about this remix. I'm sure I'll not be rude, but it's just your attitude. But honestly, if people are struggling to pinpoint what exactly they don't like about this remix, then I kinda get it, because out of everything on this list, this is the one I'm struggling the most to explain why I do like it. As Fergal Lawler from the Cranberries said,
It's so different, but not, you know. And
as such, it's really difficult to isolate exactly what Cook has done with it. I guess the most obvious new element in this remix is the drums, which have a bit of the shuffle of the Amen break about them, but aren't the sample as far as I can tell. You've got a different chord progression on the chorus, and the epic string swells from the original are mostly resigned to the end. He mentioned in an interview he deliberately avoided using synthesizers for this, and honestly, working predominantly with acoustic instruments was the right call, even if it doesn't seem to have been appreciated by many. Ultimately though, this remix has done something particularly special for me, because I assumed until this year that I did not like Linger as a song at all. Listening to it next to the remix made me realise that actually it is a damn good song, but I find a lot of the strings and the layering of the original kind of smothering, the drums are too light for me, and it all just falls over itself into this easy listening slop. Cook's version I think is just better paced overall, it gives the vocals a bit more breath, and after the fifth listen of this track I ended up singing along with it. I have never sang along to Linger before in my entire life, but this remix plucked that out of me. I don't think I'm going to be able to talk hardcore Cranberries fans into changing their mind on this remix, but it really changed my mind on this song, and for me that is the power of a good remix. And just as a heads up, Cook has mentioned that he also has the stems for Zombie, so there may be more angry Cranberries fans to shadowbox with in future YouTube videos. Number 4.
Diamond mine, war crime, satellite drone, but we still can't find connection.
More Mother with her remix of improv metal band Sumac's song World of Light. I like More Mother a lot, but my god is she prolific. Ever since I first became aware of her output some years ago, she's just been constantly active, making music in the world of punk, jazz, industrial noise, club music. It seems like there's no genre that her scathing, deep-voiced commentary on the West's colonial history is ill-equipped to run roughshod over. Her album this year, The Great Bailout, explored the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 over broad and evocative noiseescapes, and ended up becoming one of her most critically acclaimed releases to date. It is not an easy listen, and like much of More Mother's back catalogue, it is not intended to be. And yet, if we factor in her remix output from 2024, then it also heralded perhaps one of her most accessible tracks to date, courtesy of this Sumac overhaul. It would be pushing things a lot to say that this is the closest she's ever done to a pop song, but I would also say that this is the closest I can remember her ever sounding to Rage Against the Machine. Rap metal has quite understandably developed a god-awful reputation over the years due to its respective forays into self-aggrandizement and self-pity. This remix serves as a reminder that this subgenre actually had some political weight to it at one point.
Everybody's working in the mine or the factory or the sweatshop. New death drop.
But far from being a throwback, the fluid composition here feels very fresh to my ears. Particularly impressive about this remix is the fact that More Mother had over 25 minutes of material to sift through from the original. But the clarity and precision with which Moore picks out elements for use in her remix here is absolutely pristine. And yet, even though she is effectively just creating a backing track for her vocals, it honours the original in quite a nice way as well, reflecting its shifting structure but presenting it in a shorter tableau format. You've got her shimmering, hushed verses at the beginning, a dramatic breakdown of pensive emotion in the middle, and then just outright anger for the coda.
Hollywood made a billion. Hollywood made a killing.
Much like the Chelsea Wolfe remix I've covered in this list, More Mother uses screamo vocals as backing vocals as well, but the hierarchy here is much more clear. Because even though Sumac's growls are pretty impactful, Moore is indisputably the lead. Almost like she's preaching to the metal choir. And it's just a great vocal showcase for her as well, and whilst lyrically it's inevitably a bit more broad than her album tracks tend to be, the fury, the boiled bloods, and the continuously important messaging is all very much in check. Yep, a truly exhilarating 4 minutes here, and if you were disappointed that Backwash didn't drop more material in 2024, you could do a heck of a lot worse than this as a substitute. Number 3. Karen Yame KG on the remix of Contact by Kelela. This is probably the closest to a quote-unquote traditional club remix that I'm putting on this list, and I know for a fact there are friends of mine who will probably listen to this and be baffled as to why I think this is special enough to put as high as number 3 on my list. I mentioned in my review of the Raven remix collection that the package overall was a little bit of a disappointment for me, but did contain some of the strongest remixes I heard this year. And although there are undoubtedly other remixes on the project that were more flashy or more nakedly emotional than this one, this is the one that hit me in my soul the most. The original version of Contact is decent, but for me showcases the limitations a little of Kelela's rave-inspired R&B approach. Lyrically, Kelela said this song was meant to represent every part of a club night, from the preparation beforehand to achieving that moment of intimacy on a dance floor, but musically I find it a little too static to convey that journey. As far as the remix goes, Nyame usually tends to produce more club-based amapiano music, but here it seems like she has a full sense of this song's dynamics, because the way this is laid out is absolutely beautiful. There are countless dance tracks out there about clubbing, and most of them fetishize the escapism of nightclubs to high hell, but here with lines like and it reflects a more sobering portrait of the role of the night out, of just how important it is to have that moment of the week where you let off some steam. And then once Nyame has dispatched this pre-chorus, she brings the beat in, and it feels more like the bustling chaos, the immersive experience of a good night out. Again, much like the Chelsea Wolfe remix I mentioned earlier, this is an instance where reverb is being used very much in aid of the track rather than in a compensatory manner. It gives the track this bleary-eyed quality where Nyame transports us to a world in which the nighttime is a genuinely magical place. Those nights out where you know it's going to be great because there's always someone looking out for you. I guess Burial is the most obvious touch point for this kind of feeling, but really what this remix reminded me of was those turn of the millennium UK garage classics like Girls Like Us by B15 Project or Sincere by MJ Cole. That kind of blurry liminal space between asleep and awake, between mind and body. Overall though, this is just one of those club songs that makes me feel safe. And again, given the state of 2024, I will take a well-reasoned utopia in my music any day of the week. Number 2.
So I know I can cry, so I cry. Now I wanna think about all the good times, like the first time I heard your music, my ex-boyfriend played your...
Second member of the Cook family in this list, AG, coming in with this complete overhaul of Charli XCX's tribute to the late Sophie. I mentioned earlier that I'm not doing a best albums list for 2024, but if I was, I'm 95% sure that Brat and It's Completely Different but also Still Brat would have taken the crown. No other remix album this year offered up anywhere near as captivating a narrative in relation to the original, and even though Charli was a little apprehensive about calling it a remix album, to me it very much is. And yet it's a remix album where it effectively felt like you couldn't listen to Brat without listening to Still Brat as well, just due to the sheer intertwining musical multiverse that it created. It's the remix album out of anything this year that had the strongest relationship to its original counterpart, and my review of it was already pretty long at 43 minutes, but honestly I could have banged on about it for twice that length. There was so much to unpack in this project. And yet, because of how interlinked the two albums were as an experience, I actually found it kind of difficult to enjoy the tracks individually outside the context of Brat. As musical happenings go, these two felt so self-contained that trying to take individual parts out of them and digest them in other contexts largely felt wrong. Kind of like just playing with the moustache from a Mr. Potato Head. However, the A.G. Cook remix of So I was very much an exception for me. Maybe because it's one of the longer tracks on Still Brat at 4 minutes, or maybe because this complete rework of a regret ballad into a celebratory obituary just hit me so goddamn powerfully emotionally. I am definitely not averse to sad music, but I find the more general and broad the sadness, the more I struggle to connect with it, and lyrically that was kind of my problem with the original So I.
Always on my mind, every day, every night.
But this rework not only leans much higher into specificity, with XCX rattling off descriptions of memories she has and cherishes with her friend and collaborator.
Now when I think about all the good times, DJ sat back to back with Twiggy, she was nervous, you were so nice, said you had the best time with her.
But it also just offered a form of narrative that I don't feel like I hear that often in pop music. One of my favourite songs in 2023 was by a rapper named Homeboy Sandman, titled Then We Broke Up. As the title suggests, it's a breakup song, but rather than being a breakup song that wallows in self-pity or villainises the ex, Sandman basically spends the song celebrating the best moments of the relationship.
We really had a blast. We had a lot of laughs. We thought we had it all.
And rather than pining for those to come back or re-evaluating them negatively, he just accepts that they had some great times in that relationship. It wasn't viable in the long term, but he's glad they had that time together. And genuinely, I found that to be an incredibly refreshing and validating sentiment in relationship-based music. And the Cook remix of So I felt like the bereavement version of that song. It might sound like I'm advocating for toxic positivity here, but it's so easy to get in your own head about things that you could have done differently, but sometimes it's much more necessary, much more healthy, much more affirming to remember the moments that you got right. For me though, as much as this remix is a celebration of Sophie's life, in the context of Still Brat, I also feel it functions as a celebration of A.G. Cook, and rightly so. Cook is very much the MVP as far as Brat production goes.
Yeah, there's not really anything that's in tune on this song.
And he pulls off a pretty impressive feat with this remix, which is making a song that's a tribute to the sound of Sophie, without it sounding flippant or artificial. It makes sense that he pulled it off because Cook was also a long-term friend and collaborator with Sophie, and I've seen at least a few people online say that some of the most Sophie sounding elements in this remix are in fact sampled directly from her. It could be such an easy thing to mess up in the wrong hands, but Cook and XCX absolutely nail it here. And yet, as much as it's a celebration, it's a bittersweet one at that, because in terms of emotional impact, I've got to talk about the end of this track, where there's these metallic Sophie-esque beats that, to me, kind of sound like the last machinations of a life support machine. I avoided that comparison in my original review because I worried it was maybe a bit too on the nose, but it's a big part of why I was so emotionally affected by this song. That notion of finality, of an abrupt end, of the fact that sometimes things just don't pan out the way they should have done, and it is one of the most innovative gut punches I've heard in music for a long time, and ultimately rounded off one of the most emotive listening experiences of the year perfectly for me. So, you're probably wondering, what could possibly have pipped so high to the post for me in 2024? Well, before we find out, here's some honourable mentions. Yeah, the original Nepo Daddy, Father Del Rey almost made the list. I really wanted to like this one enough to put it in the top 10 just so that the inclusion of Lana Del Rey in the thumbnail was a little bit less clickbaity. And although it wasn't quite strong enough for me, this is nonetheless a great reinterpretation from Anna, turning the fairly mid-folk of the original into this sweeping Swan Lake style ambient soundscape. It's the kind of music that genuinely makes me miss the days when Enya was allowed in the charts.
Been a nasty girl, nasty, I've been a nasty girl. Just like if you keep up with me, I've been a nasty girl. If you do.
After her full-length foray into shoegaze in 2023, Jane Remover seemed to have been on something of a mini-mission in 2024 to remind everyone of her twisted dance music credentials. And for me, this was the most successful example of that. I think the production on this glitchy techno banger is maybe a tad thinner than I would like, but I definitely want to hear more remixes from her if this is the standard. I had this one on the list for a good while, and it was actually pretty darn high at one point, but some of the iffy mixing choices in the middle finally wore me down in the last month. Nonetheless, that piano loop is still one of my favourite hooks I heard all year. Genuinely got stuck in my head numerous times.
What the lick me? I'm waiting for you to pull up and come and lick me. It's been a minute since I let you come and stick me. You know I always leave the situation sticky.
Remember a few minutes ago when I said, and although there are undoubtedly other remixes on the project that were more flashy, well, this is the flashy one. I feel like it's maybe missing one more trick to take it over the top, but this really exemplified the anything goes attitude that remixing should have to me. It's constantly throwing ideas out there and trying to one-up itself. This one misses out on the list because I like the original version ever so slightly more than this remix, and I don't think it's good practice to fill a top 10 remixes list with versions where I prefer the original song. But I want to shout this one out regardless because this is a classic case of a remixer having to deal with an iconic original and being utterly unintimidated by it, keeping a few elements but ultimately just taking it in its own completely divergent vibe. And also, if this is the last piece of music ever to be released from the Soft Moon, given that he died tragically this year, then it's a hell of a note to go out on. I couldn't really justify putting this one on the main list as it's a fairly simple clean-up job that mainly just gives the track a more modern beat, but it slaps. The whole Naya Beat Volume 2 compilation slaps, in fact, and I just wanted to give it a shout out.
Fall in love again and again, 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 fall in love again.
This was ultimately my other favourite from Still Brat, a really nice, thoughtful and lower key overhaul. In terms of why it didn't make the list, I don't know really. I didn't make any rules about only having one track per artist or anything like that. Just think maybe this one's a tad too short. Curse the TikTok generation and their woeful attention spans.
Love you lost with the skin so fresh, free with the wind in a butterscotch head.
This one misses out on the list purely on a technicality. I discovered this track via a news article that described it as a remix of Jeff Buckley, but it's credited as a Zed original featuring Jeff Buckley. It appears on a Zed artist album rather than a Jeff Buckley remix collection. All signs point to Zed wanting me to treat this as a Zed track with a feature rather than a Zed remix of Jeff Buckley, so because of that, I can't put this on my list of my favourite remixes of the year. Which is a shame, because this is genuinely one of the best, most imaginative EDM tracks I heard all year, and it probably would have ranked pretty damn high. So Zed, if you're watching, your vanity cost you the most prestigious remixing accolade of the year. So who did win that prize? Well, before we find out, here's a quick list of remixes I enjoyed this year, but not quite enough to give them a full honourable mention. Honestly, I just wanted to prove that I did a lot of research for this channel this year. You have no idea. Anyways, enough stalling. It's time. Number 1. Yep, top of the list for me is Jackknife Lee's remix of Modest Mouse's Bury Me With It. Isaac Brock asked Lee to give their song a bit of a clean-up for their 20th anniversary reissue of Good News for People Who Love Bad News, and my word did he go above and beyond. I only got around to reviewing this album a few weeks ago, but when I was first listening to this album in the middle of the year, it only took 2 plays of this track for me to know that it would be on my top 10 of the year. I've mentioned in a few cases in this list how certain remixes have just felt particularly timely for me over the last year, but nothing screamed 2024 for me quite as hard as this one, and I mean screamed. The original song is kind of an ironic character piece about how the narrator would rather stop living than be robbed of any of the indulgent self-destructive experiences that he's become so accustomed to. And in 2024, I cannot think of a song that more accurately, vivaciously, expressively captured the prevailing trend of discourse in the world. I still have mixed feelings about Isaac Brock, but his delivery on this song absolutely nails the sheer desperation and ridiculousness of someone who's decided that their motto for life is, I would rather die than change anything about the way that I act, the way that I treat others, the way that I live my life.
But if the party's over, if the fun has to end, would you do this for me, my friend? And please rise that ribbon with it.
It is that level of vanity and stubbornness that has got us to where we are in the world at this very moment, and whilst I don't know if such a collective personality can ever be fixed up and tweaked for the better, this is absolutely the most withering parody of it that I heard this year. And yeah, as much as the sentiment of this song is very 2024, the production on the original doesn't quite nail it for me, feeling a little too ramshackle and stepping on the tone of the song at points. I didn't know anything about Jackknife Lee prior to doing my review, but his years of production experience really shine through in this remix. Now, this is probably an odd one to put as my number 1 remix of the year because it isn't a radical overhaul like some of the others, and kind of like the Cranberries remix, it keeps a lot of the original elements intact. But my god, I cannot think of another remix I listened to this year where every single decision it made, it somehow got it right. This is a remix that knows exactly when to bring the beat in, when to take it out, when to change to a different beat, when to dial down on the riffs, when to absolutely let the riffs go ham. It even knows when to pause to give the song's most exasperated line its moment in the sun.
We worked harder than this!
But also, where the production on the original felt insular and implosive, Lee turns this into a song that feels like it's aimed at the wider world. The drums feel like a grim, unified march of death.
We move to the left and we move to the right!
This is angry music for a world full of headless chickens voting for Heartless Christmas. It is a feel-bad bedroom pop song that you can both dance to and scream along to, because there's nothing else you can do about the state of the world. It is a timely piece that I never got tired of listening to in 2024, and as such, it's my favourite remix of the year. So that's the list. Did you hear any of these remixes? Did you have any thoughts or feelings about them? What were your favourite remixes of 2024 and why? Let me know in the comments below, especially if there's any you think I missed out on this list. And please do subscribe to this channel if you'd like to see more remix-based review content. Thank you very much for watching. This list is over.